Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun adjusted her position against the cold rock, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders that came from hours of maintaining the same surveillance pose. The October wind cut through her desert camouflage uniform as she peered through her high-power binoculars at the ridge line 3 kilometers away. Dawn was breaking over the Karengal Valley, painting the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains in shades of amber and gold that would have taken her breath away if she hadn't seen the same sight every morning for the past 6 months. Her radio crackled softly beside her, maintaining the connection to Firebase Restrepo below. The familiar voices of her fellow soldiers drifted through the static, discussing patrol routes and supply drops with the casual efficiency of men and women who had learned to treat war like any other job. Sarah had been part of the intelligence unit stationed at Restrepo since March, her Mandarin Chinese language skills and analytical background making her valuable for intercepting communications and monitoring Taliban movements along the Pakistan border. The ridge she watched held strategic importance that few outside the intelligence community understood. Known as Hill 1705 on military maps, it commanded views of 3 major valleys and served as a natural highway for insurgent fighters moving between their hideouts in Pakistan and their targets in Afghanistan. For months, Sarah and her team had documented patterns of movement, photographed faces, and built comprehensive profiles of the Taliban commanders who used the ancient goat paths carved into the mountainside. This particular morning felt different, though Sarah couldn't put her finger on why. Perhaps it was the unusual radio chatter she had intercepted the night before, fragments of conversation in Pashto that mentioned a meeting of high-value targets. Or maybe it was the way her commanding officer, Major Thompson, had emphasized the importance of maintaining constant surveillance today, his weathered face more serious than usual during the morning briefing. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the first signs of movement on the distant ridge. 3 figures emerged from behind a cluster of boulders, their traditional Afghan clothing and careful movements immediately identifying them as potential targets of interest. She reached for her camera, a high-resolution model capable of capturing facial features at extreme distances, and began documenting their activities. The figures appeared to be setting up some kind of observation post, arranging equipment that glinted in the early sunlight. Her radio buzzed with an incoming transmission from the operations center. Overwatch 7, this is base. We have confirmation of VIP movement in your sector. Maintain visual contact and report any developments immediately. Sarah pressed the transmit button twice in acknowledgement, the standard procedure for maintaining radio silence while confirming receipt of orders. The morning progressed slowly, as surveillance work always did. Sarah made careful notes in her logbook, recording times, positions, and activities of the figures on the ridge. By 9 o'clock, she had counted at least 8 individuals, more than the usual number for a typical Taliban patrol. Something significant was happening, and she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with potentially important intelligence gathering. Around 10:30, Sarah noticed increased activity near the ridge. Vehicles were approaching from the north, their dust clouds visible long before the actual trucks became clear through her optics. She switched to her spotting scope for a closer look and felt her pulse quicken as she identified the convoy. 3 vehicles, military-grade, moving with the precision and security protocols that suggested high-value passengers. As the convoy reached the ridge, Sarah watched figures emerge from the lead vehicle. Even at this distance, she could see the bearing and movement patterns that suggested military training rather than typical Taliban fighters. These were not local insurgents. Through her scope, she began photographing the meeting, capturing images that would later be analyzed by intelligence specialists back at base. The gathering on the ridge grew larger as more individuals arrived. Sarah counted at least 15 people now, arranged in what appeared to be a formal meeting. She could see equipment being set up, possibly communications gear or surveillance equipment of their own. The professional nature of the operation was becoming increasingly apparent, and Sarah realized she might be witnessing something far more significant than a typical Taliban planning session. Her radio crackled again. Overwatch 7. We have incoming friendly aircraft for reconnaissance run. Maintain position and continue documentation. Sarah acknowledged the transmission and looked up to see a small observation drone beginning its approach toward the ridge. The unmanned aircraft would provide additional intelligence gathering capabilities, but Sarah's ground-based position offered perspectives that aerial surveillance sometimes missed. As noon approached, the meeting on the ridge appeared to be reaching some kind of climax. The figures had arranged themselves in a tight circle, and Sarah could see what appeared to be maps or documents being passed around. She increased her photography rate, knowing that every image could potentially provide crucial intelligence about Taliban operations in the region. It was then that she noticed something unusual. Among the traditionally dressed Afghan figures, she spotted what appeared to be someone in different clothing. Through her scope, she could make out what looked like military fatigues, but not the typical pattern worn by Taliban fighters. The figures stood apart from the others, observing rather than participating directly in the meeting. Sarah adjusted her scope's focus and felt a chill run down her spine as the figure's features became clearer. The build, the posture, the way the person carried themselves suggested Western military training. She grabbed her radio, knowing she needed to report this development immediately, but hesitated as she tried to process what she was seeing. The meeting continued for another hour, with various individuals taking turns addressing the group. Sarah maintained her documentation, filling 2 memory cards with photographs and accumulating pages of detailed notes about positions, movements, and apparent hierarchies within the gathering. Her training had taught her to be objective and thorough, recording everything without making premature judgments about significance or meaning. As the afternoon progressed, the gathering began to show signs of breaking up. Small groups started moving away from the central meeting point, heading toward different paths down the mountainside. Sarah tracked as many as possible, noting their directions and estimated destinations. This information would be valuable for planning future operations and understanding Taliban movement patterns. The mysterious figure in military fatigues remained longer than the others, continuing to observe as the traditional Afghan fighters departed. Sarah kept her scope trained on this individual, trying to capture clear images that might help intelligence analysts determine identity and affiliation. The person's behavior continued to strike her as different from typical Taliban operatives, suggesting possible foreign involvement in whatever operation was being planned. As the sun reached its zenith, Sarah realized she had been in position for over 6 hours without a break. Her body ached from maintaining the same position, and she needed to rotate observation duties with her partner who was monitoring from a different angle several hundred meters away. But the activity on the ridge was too important to abandon, and she maintained her watch despite growing discomfort. Around 2 o'clock, new movement caught her attention. Another vehicle was approaching the ridge, this one moving with even greater security precautions than the morning convoy. Sarah adjusted her scope and felt her heart rate increase as she identified the approaching vehicle as an American military Humvee. Through her binoculars, she could see the distinctive markings and equipment that clearly identified it as belonging to U.S. forces. The Humvee stopped at the base of the ridge, and Sarah watched as several figures emerged. Even at this distance, she could recognize the bearing and equipment of American military personnel. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what she was witnessing. Why would American forces be arriving at a Taliban meeting location? Was this some kind of planned operation, or had the Americans stumbled into a dangerous situation? Sarah reached for her radio, knowing she needed to report this development immediately. The presence of American personnel in the same location as suspected Taliban operatives created a potentially dangerous and confusing situation that required immediate attention from her superiors. But as she prepared to transmit, she noticed something that made her pause. The American personnel were not approaching the ridge with the caution and tactical awareness typical of soldiers entering potentially hostile territory. Instead, they moved with the confidence of people attending a planned meeting. Sarah watched through her scope as one of the Americans, bearing the insignia of senior rank, began climbing the path toward the ridge where the Taliban meeting had taken place. The implications of what she was witnessing began to dawn on Sarah as she maintained her observation. This was not a coincidental encounter or a tactical operation gone wrong. The coordination and timing suggested something far more complex and potentially troubling. She continued photographing and documenting, knowing that whatever was happening on that ridge was beyond anything her training had prepared her for. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched the American officer reach the ridge and engage in what appeared to be a cordial meeting with some of the remaining figures from the earlier gathering. The casual nature of their interaction, combined with the obvious pre-planning evident in the timing and location, suggested a level of coordination that challenged everything Sarah thought she knew about the conflict in Afghanistan. Her radio crackled with routine check-ins from base, but Sarah found herself hesitating to report what she was seeing. The complexity of the situation and the potential implications of American personnel meeting with suspected Taliban operatives required careful consideration and documentation before making any official reports that could have far-reaching consequences. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Sarah realized she was witnessing something that would change her understanding of the war in Afghanistan forever. The carefully orchestrated meeting on the ridge represented a level of complexity and moral ambiguity that her black and white military training had not prepared her to handle. But her duty remained clear: document, observe, and report. Whatever the consequences, the truth of what happened on that ridge needed to be preserved and understood. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Hindu Kush as Sarah continued her surveillance of the ridge. Through her scope, she watched the American officer engage in animated conversation with three men in traditional Afghan dress. The relaxed body language of all participants confirmed her growing suspicion that this was not a chance encounter, but a prearranged meeting of significant importance. Sarah had been documenting military operations for 8 months, but nothing in her experience compared to what she was witnessing. The careful choreography of the day's events, from a morning Taliban gathering to the perfectly timed arrival of American personnel, suggested a level of coordination that challenged everything she understood about the nature of the conflict in Afghanistan. Her radio remained silent, except for routine check-ins from Firebase Restrepo. Sarah had not yet reported the presence of American personnel at the Taliban meeting site, uncertain how to properly communicate the complex and potentially explosive nature of what she was observing. Her training emphasized the importance of accurate reporting, but the implications of this particular situation seemed to require more careful consideration than standard protocols provided. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah noticed new movement in the valley below the ridge. A small convoy of vehicles was approaching from the south, moving with the tactical precision and security measures typical of high-value target transportation. Through her binoculars, she could see the convoy consisted of 4 heavily armored vehicles with what appeared to be significant escort protection. As the convoy drew closer, Sarah switched to her highest magnification scope and felt her pulse quicken as she identified the passengers. The vehicle markings and security protocols indicated the presence of senior military leadership, possibly general-level officers based on the size and composition of the escort. This development added another layer of complexity to an already confusing situation. The convoy stopped at the base of the ridge, and Sarah watched as several high-ranking officers emerged from the armored vehicles. Even at this distance, she could identify the bearing and insignia that marked them as senior American military leadership. The precision of their arrival timing, coinciding with the ongoing meeting on the ridge, suggested this, too, was part of a carefully planned operation. Sarah realized she was potentially witnessing the highest levels of American military leadership engaging with suspected Taliban operatives in what appeared to be a coordinated meeting. The implications were staggering, and she understood that the intelligence she was gathering could have profound consequences for understanding the true nature of the conflict in Afghanistan. Through her scope, Sarah watched as one of the newly arrived officers, bearing the stars of a brigadier general, began the climb toward the ridge. His confident bearing and the relaxed posture of his security detail suggested he was approaching a friendly meeting rather than entering potentially hostile territory. The general moved with the assurance of someone fulfilling a scheduled appointment. As the general reached the ridge, Sarah documented his interaction with both the American officer who had arrived earlier and the Afghan individuals from the morning meeting. The casual nature of their greetings and The immediate beginning of what appeared to be substantive discussions confirmed that this gathering represented a significant and pre-planned event. Sarah's training had taught her to remain objective and avoid making premature judgments about the significance of observed activities. But the evidence mounting before her eyes suggested she was witnessing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about the war in Afghanistan. The coordination between American military leadership and suspected Taliban operatives implied relationships and agreements that existed far beyond public knowledge or official policy. The meeting on the ridge continued for over an hour, with various participants taking turns addressing the group and examining what appeared to be maps or strategic documents. Sarah maintained her photography and documentation, filling additional memory cards with images that captured the faces, interactions, and apparent hierarchies within this remarkable gathering. As the sun began to sink lower toward the western mountains, casting longer shadows across the valley, Sarah noticed increased activity around the meeting site. Additional security personnel had positioned themselves at various points around the ridge, and she could see communications equipment being set up to maintain contact with various off-site locations. It was during this period of increased activity that Sarah first noticed the third-party observer. Positioned on a rocky outcrop approximately 500 meters northeast of the main meeting site, a figure lay concealed in what appeared to be a professional sniper position. Sarah adjusted her scope and felt a chill of recognition as she identified the equipment and positioning typical of a long-range precision shooter. The presence of a sniper overlooking the meeting added an ominous element to an already complex situation. Sarah could not determine whether the shooter was providing security for the meeting or posed a potential threat to the participants. The professional nature of the position and the quality of equipment visible through her scope suggested military-level training and capabilities. Sarah grabbed her radio, knowing that the presence of an unknown sniper required immediate reporting regardless of the complexity of the overall situation. But as she prepared to transmit, she noticed movement that made her pause. The sniper was adjusting position, moving from passive observation to what appeared to be an active shooting stance. Through her scope, Sarah watched the distant figure settle into a prone position and begin the methodical process of range estimation and target acquisition. The professional precision of the movements confirmed her assessment that this was a highly trained shooter preparing to engage a target at the meeting site. But Sarah could not determine whether this was part of the planned security for the meeting or represented a threat to the participants. The general on the ridge continued his discussion with the other meeting participants, apparently unaware of the sniper positioned to observe their gathering. Sarah realized she was potentially the only person aware of all elements of the situation unfolding before her, and she faced a decision that could have life or death consequences for the people she was watching. Her training emphasized the importance of reporting threats to American personnel, but the complex nature of the meeting made it unclear who might be friend or foe in this situation. The apparent coordination between American military leadership and suspected Taliban operatives challenged her understanding of appropriate responses to potential threats. Sarah watched through her scope as the sniper completed final preparations and settled into a firing position. The target appeared to be the general, based on the sniper's position and angle of aim. Sarah realized she was about to witness an assassination attempt against senior American military leadership, and her duty to protect American personnel became clear regardless of the confusing circumstances of the meeting. She reached for her radio to warn of the sniper threat, but before she could transmit, the situation exploded into chaos. The crack of a high-powered rifle echoed across the valley, and Sarah watched in horror as the general collapsed on the ridge. The single shot had found its target with precision that confirmed the professional capabilities of the shooter. The meeting site immediately erupted into chaos as security personnel responded to the attack. Sarah could see figures scrambling for cover and weapons being drawn as the participants realized they were under fire. The carefully orchestrated meeting had transformed into a battle zone in the space of a heartbeat. Through her scope, Sarah tracked the sniper position and watched as the shooter began a rapid withdrawal from the rocky outcrop. The professional nature of the retreat combined with the precision of the shot, suggested this was a carefully planned assassination rather than an opportunistic attack. The killer moved with the efficiency of someone executing a well-rehearsed escape plan. Sarah's radio exploded with frantic transmissions as the shooting was reported to Firebase Restrepo. She could hear the confusion in the voices of her fellow soldiers as they struggled to understand reports of an American general being shot during what appeared to be a meeting with Taliban operatives. The complex nature of the situation was overwhelming normal communication and reporting procedures. As emergency medical teams rushed toward the ridge, Sarah continued documenting the aftermath of the shooting. She photographed the evacuation procedures, the security responses, and the reactions of the various meeting participants. Her training demanded complete documentation of the incident, even as she struggled to process the implications of what she had witnessed. The sniper had disappeared into the complex terrain of the mountains, leaving behind a scene of confusion and contradiction that would challenge official explanations and understanding. Sarah realized she possessed intelligence about the shooting that no one else had observed, including the pre-planned nature of the meeting and the presence of all parties involved. Within minutes of the shooting, helicopter medevac aircraft were approaching the ridge to evacuate the wounded general. Sarah watched the professional efficiency of the emergency response while struggling to understand how she should report her observations. The complexity of what she had witnessed seemed to require more than standard intelligence reporting procedures. As the sun set over the Hindu Kush, casting the valley into shadows that matched Sarah's growing sense of uncertainty, she realized that the shooting on the ridge represented only the beginning of a much larger and more complex situation. The careful documentation she had maintained throughout the day would become crucial evidence in understanding not just the assassination attempt, but the broader network of relationships and agreements that had brought all parties together on that remote mountainside. The radio chatter from Firebase Restrepo continued to reflect confusion and uncertainty about the nature of the incident. Sarah listened as her superiors struggled to understand reports of American military leadership meeting with Taliban operatives, and she realized that her unique perspective on the day's events would soon make her a critical figure in whatever investigation would follow. As darkness fell over the valley, Sarah prepared to extract from her observation position, knowing that her role as a simple intelligence analyst was about to become far more complicated. The images on her memory cards and the notes in her logbook contained information that could reshape understanding of the war in Afghanistan. But she was beginning to realize that possessing such knowledge could be as dangerous as it was valuable. The emergency lights of Firebase Restrepo cut through the darkness as Sarah made her way back to the base perimeter. The weight of her equipment bag seemed heavier than usual, loaded as it was with memory cards and documentation that could potentially rewrite the official narrative of the war in Afghanistan. Her mind raced with the implications of what she had witnessed, and she struggled to determine how to properly report the complex sequence of events from the ridge. The base was buzzing with activity as news of the general's shooting spread through the ranks. Sarah could see additional security measures being implemented, with extra patrols and heightened alert status indicating that the incident was being treated as a significant security threat. The casual atmosphere of a routine deployment had been replaced by the tension of a base under potential attack. As Sarah approached the Intelligence Operations Center, she was met by Major Thompson, her commanding officer. His weathered face was grim with concern, and she could see the stress of the situation in the tight lines around his eyes. He gestured for her to follow him into a secure briefing room where several other senior officers were already assembled around a conference table covered with maps and communications equipment. The room fell silent as Sarah entered, and she realized that her role as the primary observer of the Ridge meeting made her a crucial witness to events that were already being classified at the highest levels. The presence of senior officers from multiple units suggested that the shooting had triggered responses that went far beyond the normal protocols for combat incidents in Afghanistan. Major Thompson began the debriefing with standard questions about her observation position, equipment used, and timeline of events. Sarah provided precise answers, drawing on her training and experience to deliver clear and objective reports. But as the questioning progressed, she realized that the officers were struggling to understand the complexity of what she had observed. When Sarah described the morning meeting between Taliban operatives and the mysterious figure in military fatigues, she could see confusion and concern on the faces around the table. The presence of what appeared to be Western military personnel at a Taliban gathering challenged basic assumptions about the nature of the conflict and the identification of friend versus foe. The arrival of American military leadership for what appeared to be a prearranged meeting with the same Taliban operatives created even greater confusion among the debriefing officers. Sarah could see them exchanging glances that suggested her report was contradicting official understanding of the day's planned operations. The complexity of the situation was clearly beyond what normal military procedures had prepared them to handle. As Sarah described the presence of the sniper and the precision of the shot that wounded the general, the questioning became more intense. The officers wanted detailed information about the shooter's position, equipment, and escape route, information that could be crucial for tracking and apprehending the assassin. But Sarah could see that they were also struggling with the broader implications of her observations. The fact that a sniper had been able to position themselves to overlook a meeting between American military leadership and suspected Taliban operatives raised questions about security procedures and operational planning that went to the heart of military command structure. Sarah's detailed documentation of the events was providing information that challenged official narratives and operational assumptions. During a break in the questioning, Sarah overheard conversations between the senior officers that revealed the broader scope of the crisis her observations had created. The wounded general was apparently involved in classified operations that his presence at the Taliban meeting had potentially compromised. The shooting had not only created a security incident, but had exposed operational activities that were supposed to remain secret. When the debriefing resumed, the questions took on a different character. The officers began asking about what Sarah had reported to other personnel, what copies she had made of her documentation, and who else might have observed the events on the ridge. Sarah realized that her role was shifting from witness to potential security risk as the implications of her knowledge became clear. The senior officers were particularly interested in the timing and coordination of the various arrivals at the ridge. Sarah's detailed logs and photographs provided evidence of the pre-planned nature of the meeting, information that contradicted official explanations about the general's presence in the area. Her documentation was becoming inconvenient evidence of activities that were supposed to remain hidden. As the hours passed, Sarah began to sense that the debriefing was becoming as much about damage control as information gathering. The officers were clearly concerned about the implications of her observations and were working to understand how to manage information that could potentially compromise ongoing operations and challenge official policies. Around midnight, the debriefing was interrupted by the arrival of personnel from military intelligence who took over the questioning process. Their approach was more systematic and thorough, focusing on technical details of her surveillance methods and the precision of her documentation. Sarah realized that her reports were being evaluated not just for operational intelligence, but for reliability and potential security implications. The military intelligence officers were particularly interested in her photographs and wanted to examine every image she had captured during the day. Sarah watched as they analyzed her documentation with sophisticated computer equipment, enhancing images and cross-referencing faces against classified databases. The thoroughness of their examination suggested that the people she had observed were known to intelligence agencies. As the intelligence officers worked through her materials, Sarah noticed increased security around the briefing room. Additional personnel had been posted outside, and she could see that communications equipment had been set up to maintain secure contact with higher headquarters. The level of security suggested that her observations had triggered responses at the highest levels of military command. The questioning resumed with focus on her assessment of the sniper's capabilities and equipment. The intelligence officers wanted detailed information about the shooting position, the apparent quality of the rifle used, and the precision of the shot. Sarah's military training allowed her to provide technical analysis that confirmed the professional nature of the assassination attempt. But as she provided information about the sniper, Sarah began to realize that the intelligence officers were also evaluating her own capabilities and training. Their questions about her marksmanship qualifications and familiarity with long-range shooting techniques suggested they were considering whether she could have been a shooter rather than merely an observer. The possibility that she might be considered a suspect in the assassination attempt had not occurred to Sarah, but the direction of the questioning made it clear that her position overlooking the ridge and her detailed knowledge of the shooting made her a person of interest in the investigation. Her role was shifting from witness to potential perpetrator as the complexity of the case developed. When the intelligence officers began asking about her personal background, political views, and relationships with other personnel, Sarah realized that she was being subjected to a full security investigation. Her access to classified information and her detailed observation of sensitive operations had made her a security concern regardless of her actual involvement in the shooting. The examination of her equipment revealed that her cameras and scopes were capable of the precision documentation she had provided, but they also confirmed that she had the technical skills necessary for long-range observation and potentially long-range shooting. Her military training and intelligence background made her both a valuable witness and a potential security threat. As dawn approached, Sarah found herself in a situation she had never imagined. Her dedication to thorough documentation and objective reporting had provided crucial intelligence about a complex and sensitive operation, but it had also made her a central figure in an investigation that seemed to view her capabilities as much with suspicion as appreciation. The intelligence officers informed her that she would be kept in secure quarters while the investigation continued. Sarah realized that her observation of the Ridge meeting had transformed her from an anonymous intelligence analyst into a key player in a situation that involved the highest levels of military and political leadership. Her desire to serve her country through careful and thorough intelligence work had placed her at the center of events that challenged everything she thought she knew about the war in Afghanistan. As she was escorted to secure quarters, Sarah caught glimpses of increased activity throughout Firebase Restrepo. Additional aircraft were arriving, bringing personnel who were clearly involved in the expanding investigation. The shooting on the ridge had triggered a response that went far beyond normal combat incident procedures, and Sarah was beginning to understand that her observations had uncovered something much larger than a simple assassination attempt. The weight of the memory cards and documentation in her equipment bag had seemed heavy during her return to base, but Sarah now realized that the real weight was the knowledge they contained. Information that could reshape understanding of the war, challenge official policies, and potentially implicate senior leadership in activities that contradicted public explanations of American involvement in Afghanistan. As she settled into the secure quarters that felt more like detention than protection, Sarah wondered if her dedication to truth and accurate reporting had made her a hero or a liability in a conflict where the line between friend and enemy was apparently much more complicated than she had ever imagined. The Ridge had held secrets that powerful people wanted to keep hidden, and her role as the observer who had seen too much was just beginning. 3 days into her confinement at Firebase Restrepo, Sarah was awakened by the sound of helicopters arriving in the pre-dawn darkness. The distinctive rhythm of rotors indicated heavy transport aircraft, suggesting the arrival of senior personnel or specialized equipment. Through the small window of her secure quarters, she could see the increased activity as ground crews prepared landing zones and established security perimeters. Her detention had been comfortable but isolating. She was provided with standard quarters, regular meals, and access to basic amenities, but she was clearly under guard and restricted from normal base activities. The military intelligence officers had continued their investigation, periodically returning to ask additional questions about her observations and to examine her equipment and documentation in greater detail. The arrival of the helicopters marked a change in the atmosphere at the base. Sarah could sense increased tension among the guards and support personnel, and she noticed additional security measures being implemented around the area where she was being held. The investigation into the Ridge shooting was clearly escalating, and her role as the primary witness was becoming increasingly important. Around 7 o'clock that morning, Sarah was informed that she would be participating in another debriefing session, but this time with senior personnel who had arrived during the night. The tone of the guards was more formal than usual, suggesting that whatever was about to happen represented a significant development in the investigation. Sarah was escorted to a different briefing room than had been used for her previous debriefings. This one was larger and equipped with sophisticated communications equipment that suggested secure connectivity to high-level command structures. The presence of additional technical personnel and security officers indicated that this session would be more significant than the routine questioning she had been subjected to during the past 3 days. As she entered the briefing room, Sarah was surprised to see that one of the figures seated at the conference table was the general who had been wounded in the Ridge shooting. His arm was in a sling, and she could see facial bandages that testified to the severity of his injuries, but his presence indicated that he had recovered sufficiently to participate in the investigation. His survival was clearly important to understanding the events on the Ridge. The general was accompanied by several other senior officers, including personnel Sarah recognized as belonging to special operations units based on their uniforms and bearing. The composition of the group suggested that the investigation had evolved beyond normal military intelligence procedures and was now involving specialized units with capabilities Sarah could only guess at. Major Thompson was also present, but his role appeared to have been reduced to that of an observer rather than a participant in the questioning. Sarah realized that the investigation had been taken over by authorities with higher clearances and broader jurisdiction than her normal chain of command. Her situation was clearly being handled at levels far above routine military procedures. The questioning began with the general himself, despite his obvious injuries and the strain of speaking through bandaged facial wounds. His voice was hoarse, but clear as he introduced himself properly for the first time and explained that he needed to understand exactly what Sarah had observed on the Ridge. The personal involvement of the shooting victim in the investigation emphasized the critical importance of her testimony. General Morrison's questions were different from those posed by the intelligence officers during previous debriefings. Rather than focusing on technical details of her surveillance methods or the precision of her documentation, he wanted to understand her assessment of the relationships and dynamics she had observed among the meeting participants. His questions suggested a deep personal knowledge of the people and activities involved. When Sarah described her observations of the morning Taliban meeting and the arrival of what appeared to be Western military personnel for a coordinated gathering, General Morrison listened with an intensity that suggested personal involvement rather than professional curiosity. His questions about timing, participants, and apparent hierarchies within the meeting revealed detailed knowledge that went far beyond what a shooting victim would normally possess. The general was particularly interested in Sarah's documentation of communications equipment and coordination procedures she had observed during the meeting. Her photographs and notes provided evidence of sophisticated planning and execution that suggested the gathering was part of a larger, ongoing operation rather than an isolated incident. The general's questions confirmed that the meeting had indeed been significant beyond its role as the site of the assassination attempt. As the questioning progressed, Sarah began to understand that General Morrison had not been an innocent victim of a random attack, but rather a central participant in whatever operation the Ridge meeting represented. His detailed knowledge of the people and activities involved, combined with his obvious personal investment in understanding her observations, suggested that he had been the target of the shooting precisely because of his role in the larger situation. The most critical moment in the debriefing came when General Morrison asked Sarah to describe her observations of the sniper and the shooting itself. His questions were technically precise and revealed extensive knowledge of marksmanship and assassination techniques. Sarah realized that the general was not just seeking information about his attacker, but was evaluating her capabilities and potential involvement in the shooting. When Sarah provided her detailed account of observing the sniper's position, preparation, and execution of the shot, General Morrison listened with the focused attention of someone whose life had depended on understanding exactly what had happened. His follow-up questions about the precision of the shot, the apparent skill of the shooter, and the professional nature of the escape revealed that he understood the assassination attempt as the work of a highly trained operative. The general's next question changed the entire character of the investigation and Sarah's role within it. He leaned forward across the conference table, fixed her with a direct stare despite his facial injuries, and asked the question that would define everything that followed. Who took that shot? The way General Morrison asked the question made it clear that he was not seeking information about an unknown assassin, but rather confirming his suspicions about someone whose identity he believed he already knew. Sarah realized that the investigation had moved beyond determining what had happened to confirming who was responsible for a shooting that was apparently part of a larger conspiracy. Sarah's truthful answer that she had observed the sniper but could not identify the individual was met with skepticism from several of the officers present. The general's questions became more pointed as he pressed for details about the shooter's apparent training, equipment, and capabilities. Sarah began to understand that her detailed observations were being used to build a profile of the assassin rather than simply to understand the events on the ridge. The questioning took on an accusatory tone as the officers began suggesting that Sarah's position, training, and capabilities made her a potential suspect in a shooting rather than merely a witness to it. Her detailed knowledge of the events, combined with her marksmanship qualifications and access to the ridge area, created a circumstantial case that she struggled to counter with simple denials. General Morrison's continued questioning revealed that the investigation was based on the assumption that the shooting had been carried out by someone with inside knowledge of the meeting and access to the operational area. Sarah's role as the intelligence analyst monitoring the ridge made her both a crucial witness and a prime suspect in an assassination attempt that appeared to involve betrayal from within American military ranks. The realization that she was being investigated as a potential traitor rather than simply questioned as a witness fundamentally changed Sarah's understanding of her situation. The comfortable detention and routine questioning had been preparation for a more serious accusation that could result in court-martial proceedings and potential charges of treason or assassination of a senior military officer. As the debriefing continued into the afternoon, Sarah found herself defending not just her actions on the day of the shooting, but her loyalty and commitment to the United States military. The investigation had evolved from seeking information about an unknown assassin to building a case against someone the investigators apparently believed was sitting in the room with them. The technical analysis of her equipment revealed that her cameras and scopes were capable of the precision observation she had documented, but also confirmed that she possessed equipment and skills that could potentially be used for long-range shooting. Her military training and intelligence background made her both a valuable analyst and a potentially dangerous operative if she had chosen to betray her country. General Morrison's final questions of the session focused on Sarah's personal motivations and potential grievances against military leadership or policy in Afghanistan. His probing into her political views, personal relationships, and career satisfaction revealed that the investigation was examining whether she had reasons to target him specifically or American operations generally. As the debriefing concluded, Sarah realized that General Morrison's question about who had taken the shot was not a request for information, but rather an invitation for her to confess to an assassination attempt that the investigation had apparently decided she had committed. Her role had evolved from witness to suspect to presumed perpetrator of an attack that was part of a larger conspiracy involving the highest levels of military and political leadership. The escort back to her quarters felt different than previous returns from debriefing sessions. The guards were more vigilant and the security measures more pronounced, suggesting that her status had changed from protective custody to criminal detention. The investigation into the Ridge shooting had apparently reached conclusions that placed her at the center of a conspiracy that she was only beginning to understand. As she settled into quarters that now felt unmistakably like a prison cell, Sarah reflected on how her dedication to thorough documentation and objective reporting had led her to this moment. The memory cards and notes that had seemed so important for understanding the truth about the Ridge meeting had become evidence in a case that portrayed her as a traitor rather than a patriot. Her observation of events that challenged official narratives had made her a threat to be neutralized rather than an asset to be protected. Sarah woke to the sound of explosions echoing across Firebase Restrepo in the early hours of her 5th day in detention. The distinctive whistle and impact of incoming mortars sent the entire base in a high alert as soldiers scrambled to defensive positions and emergency protocols activated throughout the facility. Through her small window, she could see the red glow of fires erupting near the motor pool and communications center. The attack was unlike the sporadic harassing fire that occasionally targeted the base. The precision and coordination of the incoming rounds suggested a well-planned assault designed to achieve specific tactical objectives rather than simply inflict random casualties. Sarah's intelligence training allowed her to analyze the pattern of impacts and recognize that this was a deliberate operation rather than an opportunistic strike. Her guards had abandoned their posts outside her quarters, responding to the emergency like every other soldier on the base. For the first time since her detention began, Sarah found herself alone and unmonitored. The chaos of the attack provided an unexpected opportunity, though she was uncertain what use she could make of it given her confined status and limited understanding of her actual legal situation. The mortar attack continued for 20 minutes before tapering off to sporadic rounds that kept the base personnel in defensive positions. Sarah could hear the coordination of response efforts through her window as officers organized damage assessment teams and medical personnel attended to casualties. The professional nature of the base response demonstrated the experience gained through months of operations in hostile territory. As the immediate crisis subsided, Sarah was surprised to see Major Thompson approaching her quarters accompanied by 2 soldiers she didn't recognize. Their gear and bearings suggested special operations background, and their presence indicated that the investigation into the Ridge shooting was continuing despite the attack on the base. Her situation remained a priority even during active combat operations. Major Thompson's expression was grim as he entered her quarters, and Sarah could see the stress of commanding a base under attack, combined with managing a complex security investigation involving one of his own personnel. His voice was tense as he informed her that she was being transferred to a more secure location where the investigation could continue without the distractions and security concerns present at Firebase Restrepo. The transfer order came from the highest levels of command and could not be delayed despite the ongoing security situation at the base. Sarah was given 15 minutes to gather her personal belongings before being escorted to a helicopter that had arrived during the mortar attack. The timing suggested that the transfer had been planned to coincide with the assault, using the chaos as cover for moving a high-value detainee. As Sarah was escorted across the base toward the helicopter landing zone, she could see the damage from the mortar attack. The communications center had suffered a direct hit, and several vehicles in the motor pool were destroyed or damaged. But she also noticed that the areas most critical to base operations had suffered minimal damage, suggesting that the attack had been designed more for distraction than destruction. The helicopter waiting for Sarah was a specialized transport aircraft with security modifications that confirmed her status as something more than a routine prisoner transfer. The crew was clearly experienced in moving high-value or dangerous personnel, and the security protocols implemented during boarding left no doubt that she was considered a significant flight risk or security threat. During the flight to her new destination, Sarah had time to reflect on how rapidly her situation had deteriorated since observing the Ridge meeting. Her role had evolved from intelligence analyst to crucial witness to prime suspect in an assassination attempt that appeared to involve conspiracies at the highest levels of military and political leadership. Her dedication to thorough documentation had made her both indispensable and dangerous to people with the power to control her fate. The helicopter's destination proved to be a facility Sarah didn't recognize, located in a mountainous region that could have been anywhere in Afghanistan or possibly beyond. The isolated nature of the location and the sophisticated security measures evident even during landing suggested a black site or specialized detention facility designed for holding personnel whose cases involved national security implications. Upon arrival, Sarah was processed through security procedures that were more thorough and invasive than anything she had experienced during her initial detention at Firebase Restrepo. Her personal belongings were examined with techniques that suggested the facility was designed for holding personnel suspected of espionage or terrorism rather than routine military infractions. The facility itself was modern and well-equipped with sophisticated surveillance and communication systems that indicated significant investment in intelligence gathering and analysis capabilities. Sarah realized she was being held at a location designed specifically for managing cases that involve classified operations and potential security breaches at the highest levels of government. Her new quarters were more austere than those at Firebase Restrepo, but they were also more secure. The surveillance systems were omnipresent but discreet, and Sarah understood that every aspect of her behavior and communications would be monitored and analyzed by personnel trained in advanced interrogation and assessment techniques. The interrogation that began on her first day of the new facility was conducted by personnel who were clearly more experienced and sophisticated than the military intelligence officers who had questioned her at Firebase Restrepo. Their approach was psychological rather than simply procedural, designed to elicit information and confessions through techniques that went beyond routine military questioning. The interrogators had access to detailed psychological profiles and background investigations that revealed aspects of Sarah's personal life and history that she had not expected to be relevant to the Ridge shooting investigation. Their questions about her childhood, education, relationships, and career motivations suggested a comprehensive effort to understand her potential for betraying her country or military oath. Most disturbing was their apparent knowledge of classified operations and relationships that Sarah had observed but not reported in her initial debriefings. The interrogators seemed to know details about the Ridge meeting and the people involved that went far beyond what her documentation had provided. Their knowledge suggested access to intelligence sources and methods that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy she had unwittingly uncovered. The interrogators were particularly interested in Sarah's assessment of General Morrison's role in the Ridge meeting and her opinion of his apparent coordination with suspected Taliban operatives. Their questions suggested that the general's activities were under investigation by parties other than those conducting her detention, and that her observations had provided crucial evidence in a larger investigation involving potential treason at senior levels of military command. As the days passed, Sarah began to understand that her detention was not simply about determining her potential involvement in the assassination attempt, but about controlling a witness whose observations could expose a network of illegal or unauthorized activities involving American military leadership and enemy operatives. Her detailed documentation of the Ridge meeting had provided evidence of relationships and agreements that powerful people needed to keep hidden. The psychological pressure of the interrogation was designed to break down her resistance and encourage confession to crimes that Sarah was increasingly certain she had not committed. The sophisticated techniques employed by her interrogators revealed training in methods that went beyond standard military procedures and suggested involvement by intelligence agencies with advanced capabilities in persuasion and coercion. But Sarah's analysis of the interrogation techniques also revealed inconsistencies in the case being built against her. The interrogators seemed more interested in discrediting her observations and testimony than in actually determining her guilt or innocence in the assassination attempt. Their focus on undermining her credibility suggested that her value as a witness was more problematic than her potential as a perpetrator. The breakthrough in her understanding came when one of the interrogators inadvertently revealed that General Morrison had survived the assassination attempt specifically because the shot had been deliberately non-fatal. The precision required to wound rather than kill a target at long range suggested that the shooting had been designed to incapacitate the general rather than eliminate him, implying a more complex motive than simple assassination. Sarah realized that her detention was not about solving the shooting on the Ridge, but about controlling information that could expose a larger conspiracy involving unauthorized negotiations between American military leadership and Taliban operatives. Her role as the observer who had documented evidence of these relationships had made her a liability to be neutralized rather than a witness to be protected. The psychological pressure and isolation of her detention were designed to break her will to resist and encourage her to accept responsibility for crimes she had not committed in exchange for leniency and protection. But Sarah's intelligence training and analytical skills allowed her to recognize the manipulation and maintain her determination to expose the truth about what she had observed on the ridge. As her second week at the facility began, Sarah understood that her situation had evolved beyond a simple investigation into a struggle for survival against forces that possessed the authority and resources to destroy her life in order to protect secrets that reached the highest levels of military and political leadership. Her observation of a single meeting on a remote ridge in Afghanistan had placed her at the center of a conspiracy that challenged everything she thought she knew about the war and her country's role in it. The choice before her was clear: accept responsibility for crimes she had not committed in order to discredit her testimony about what she had witnessed, or maintain her innocence and face the consequences of possessing information that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. Her dedication to truth and accurate reporting had led her to this moment, where her survival depended on her willingness to become part of the very conspiracy she had been trained to expose and prevent. The hunt for the real assassin had apparently been replaced by a hunt for anyone who could threaten the secrecy of operations that existed outside official policy and legal authority. Sarah had become the prey in a game where the hunters possessed unlimited resources and the authority to rewrite reality itself. Her only weapon was the truth, and she was beginning to understand that sometimes the truth was the most dangerous weapon of all.